It is, of course, impossible not to be stricken by the similarity between this image of the money changer and several texts of Freud about censorship. One could say that the Freudian censorship is both the same thing and also the reverse of Cassian's changer. Both the changer and the censorship have to control the access to consciousness, to let some representations in and to reject the others. But Cassian's changer has for a function to decipher what is false and illusory in what presents itself into consciousness, and then to let in only what is authentic. For that purpose, the Cassian's changer uses a specific aptitude that the Latin fathers called discretio and the Greek fathers diakrisis. The Freudian censorship is, in the contrary, as you know, both much more perverse and much more naive. Perverse since Freudian censorship rejects that what presents itself as it is, and much more naive since it accepts that what is sufficiently disguised. Cassian's changer is a truth operator through discretio and diakrisis. Freudian censorship is a symbolic operator or a falsehood operator through symbolism. But I don't want to go further in such a parallel. It's only an indication, but I think that the relationships between Freudian practice and the Christian techniques of spirituality could be, if seriously done, a very interesting field of research. What I'd like to insist upon this evening is something else, or at least something indirectly related to that. There is something really important in the way Cassian poses the problem of truth about the thought. First, thoughts in Cassian, thoughts not desires, not passions, not attitude, not acts. Thoughts appear in Cassian and in all the spirituality he represents. Thoughts appear as a field of subjective data which have to be considered and analyzed as object. And I think that's the first time in the history that thoughts are considered as a possible object for an analysis. 2. Thoughts have to be analyzed not in relation to their object according to the objective experience or according to logical rules. They have to be suspected since they can be secretly altered, disguised in their own substance. 3. What man needs, if he does not want to be the victim of his own thoughts, is a perpetual work of interpretation, a perpetual hermeneutics. The function of this hermeneutics is to discover the reality hidden inside the thought. 4. This reality, which is able to hide in my thoughts, this reality is a power which is not of another nature than my soul, as is, for instance, the body. The power which hides inside my thoughts, this power is of the same nature than my thoughts and than my soul. It is the devil. It is a presence of somebody else in me. The constitution of the thoughts as a field of subjective data, needing an interpretative analysis in order to discover the power of the other in me. That is, I think, if we compare it to the Stoic technologies of the self, a quite new manner to organize the relationships between truth and subjectivity. I think that hermeneutics of the self begins there. But we have to go further. For the problem is, how is it possible to perform continuously this necessary hermeneutics of our thoughts? How is it possible to make this work of the changer, how is it possible to be the money changer of ourselves, the money changer of our thoughts? Well, the work of the answer given by Cassian about this work of the money changer, the answer given by Cassian and his inspirators is both obvious and surprising. The answer is, you will be the money changer of yourself. You will be the money changer of your thoughts. You'll interpret your thoughts. You'll be an hermeneut of yourself only by telling these thoughts to the master or to the father. By confessing not your faults, not your acts, but not what you have done. You by confessing your thoughts, the movements of your thoughts, the most imperceptible movement of these thoughts. And this operation, the fact to tell to somebody else what's happening in your consciousness, in your thought, that's the mechanism which assure the work of the money changer. Why is this confession able to assume this hermeneutical role? One reason, of course, comes to mind in exposing the movements of his heart. The disciple permits his senior to know them, and thanks to his greater experience, to his greater wisdom, the senior, the father, can better understand what's happening. His seniority permits him to distinguish between truth and illusion in the soul of the person he directs. But that is not the principal reason that Cassian invokes to explain the necessity of the confession. There is for Cassian a specific virtue of verification in the act itself of verbalization. Amongst all the examples that Cassian quotes, there is one which is particularly enlightening on this point. The story is so. A young monk, Serapion, incapable of enduring the fast, stole every evening a loaf of bread. But he did not dare, of course, to confess it to his spiritual director. And one day, this father, the spiritual director of Serapion, who had no doubt guessed all about the story, gives a public sermon on the necessity of being truthful. Convinced, the young Serapion takes out from under his robe the bread that he has stolen and shows it to everyone. Then, that's the important thing, then he prostrates himself. And then, after having given back the bread, after that, he confesses the secret he had daily of his daily meal. At the very moment of this confession, a light seems to tear itself away from his body and cross the room in spreading a disgusting smell of sulfur. One sees that in this anecdote, the decisive element is not, of course, that the master knows the truth. It's not even that the young monk reveals his act and restores the object of his theft. It is the confession. It is the verbal act of confession which comes last and which makes appear, in a certain sense, by its own mechanics, the truth of what had happened. The verbal act of confession is a proof of truth. Why? Why? Because what marks the difference between good and evil thoughts is that the evil ones cannot be referred to without difficulty. If one blushes in recounting them, if one seeks to hide them, if even quite simply one hesitates to tell them, this is the proof that they are not as good as they may appear. Evil inhabits them. Thus, verbalization constitutes a way of sorting out thoughts which present themselves. One can test their value according to whether they resist verbalization or not. Cassian gives the reason of this resistance. Satan, as principle of evil, is incompatible with the light, and he resists. with the thoughts under which he hides when confession drags him from the dark caverns of the conscience into the light of explicit discourse. I quote Cassian, "A bad thought brought into the light of day immediately loses its venom, the terrible serpent that this confession has forced out of its subterranean lair, which he hides when confession drags him from the dark caverns of the conscience into the light of explicit discourse." I quote Cassian, "A bad thought brought into the light of day immediately loses its venom, the terrible serpent that this confession has forced out of its subterranean lair to throw it out into the light and make its shame a public spectacle is quick to beat a retreat."